We're ready to go? Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulih al-Kareem amma ba'd. So, for just as a quick review from yesterday, so how many people were actually here yesterday? Okay, many of you. Okay. So, we gave a certain definition of the fitrah. Who remembers what it is? Okay, all right. Anybody else? Good starting point. Innate disposition. We gave a very specific definition. Remember? Go for it again. The supra-rational. Okay, fair enough. That's how we described it. But there was a very specific 3 words that we used to describe the fitrah. Do you remember? You wasn't there yesterday. Oh man. No, it wasn't the. So what we said that we would define the fitrah in the English language as the original normative disposition. That was the technical term we gave. Okay, we said that each one of those terms is important. If you remember, we spoke about why we said that the fitrah is the original state that a person is created in. We went to some linguistic analysis of all of that in terms of the term itself. Fitrah, we referred to the ayah in the Quran. Afillahi shak fatris samawati wal ard. We mentioned that, and that gives us the triliteral root fara, signifying origination or the starting point. And then we said normative, how something normally should be. That's what the fitrah gives you, right? And then we mentioned that if people are walking outside on their heads, that wouldn't be normal, right? You normally see people walking upright, and so that's why when we mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if you remember, where one of the versions of that hadith, remember the hadith was that every single child is born upon the fitrah, and then his parents make him a Jew, a Christian, or Magian. In one of those narrations, remember we said that the Prophet ﷺ added to that by saying, when an animal is born, right, do you detect any flaw? Okay, now why did he mention that? Because we understand that if a animal is born, let's say without a leg, without an arm, you consider that abnormal. That's not a normal way. But that's not like something you have to rationally deduce. You immediately recognize, okay, that's not normal. So your ability to see certain things as just being normal, what we call normative, how they should be, that is part of your fitrah as well, right? And so that's why, like in our kind of time that we live in, normativity is actually under attack, right? So we spoke about, that if you're considered cis-normative, this is a problem, right? That you believe that there's only 2 genders, not a whole rainbow spectrum of genders, then you're considered cis-normative, and that has negative connotations in the society around us. Okay. Similarly, we mentioned being heteronormative, right? That you believe in relations between a man and a wife, and so on and so forth. Those are all aspects of normativity. Okay. And that's something that the fitrah contains. Then we said that the last part of the definition was that it was the disposition, the natural inclination or disposition a person has. And we said that disposition, that part of the fitrah, is that a person believes in Allah, the existence of Allah, that only Allah alone is worthy of worship, and certain morals. Okay, so our ability to come to certain moral conclusions is part of our fitrah as well. If you try to argue morals and you try to take it to its philosophical conclusion, you really can't get to any sort of philosophical basis for that, right? Especially when you start looking at what we spoke about yesterday, we touched upon it, meta-ethics, right? What is the foundation of whether something is right or something is wrong? Okay, so we talked about all of that yesterday. So that's what you missed out on if you're not here. And a lot more. So, okay. Nope, that was it. Let's try this again. Okay, coming to the fitrah, someone had asked a question, and there's a few questions that were really good yesterday, and I told them that we were speaking about that today. We spoke about how that the fitrah itself, that it cannot be completely changed. In other words, you cannot replace the fitrah. Okay. However, the fitrah can be impacted. So if you remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it's his parents that make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Magian. Your environment can have an effect on your fitrah, right? And a good way to understand that is that the fitrah can be clouded over. So when we get into the details about atheism and specifically the arguments, let's say, to prove the existence of God, what we have to see is that the arguments themselves are not an end in and of themselves, but they're a means to uncloud the fitrah, right? To bring the fitrah to its original state. And that original state is that you recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, you worship him directly, meaning like you understand worship directly, and of course those morals that we mentioned, right? So what we see in this diagram is that in order to uncloud the fitrah, rational arguments are only one tool that you would have among many other, what we would call, let's say, epistemic tools. Okay, most people focus on rational arguments. In fact, yesterday, most of the questions I got, they were all in the domain of rational arguments. How can I argue with my brother and prove to him X, Y, and Z? And perhaps, the person's brother doesn't need any sort of rational argumentation, but what in fact they need is to just take him out to pizza, treat him in a really nice way and give him good character, right? You'll notice that's one of the components we have there in terms of experiences, okay? So there's a number of ways in which you can uncloud the fitrah. Rational arguments are just one of them. So we'll run through some of them very quickly. Revelation. And here, when I'm talking about the Quran, when I'm talking specifically about the Quran, I'm not talking about, let's say, the rational arguments that the Quran brings. Because we have a section where we're going to be talking about the Quran's argument for the existence of Allah. But what I'm speaking about here is other elements that are part of the Quran. Yesterday, we spoke about ayat and how they function. So if you remember from yesterday, we said an ayah has two qualities. You can remind me what the two qualities are. Two parts, like an ayah, there's two elements of an ayah. What are they? You remember? Yeah. So there's no information transfer, what we said. Okay. And the second, the effect is immediate, right? So when you think about an ayah, what an ayah does, in a sense, that's why we say it's like a sign. When you see a sign, like let's say you see a road sign, you immediately recognize, okay, that sign is stop, right? You don't sit there and start saying, okay, what is the syllogism that I have to get to before I understand that that sign is stop, right? Ayat function by targeting the fitrah. We said that the fitrah is part of the supra-rational. We had that whole discussion on the limits of rationality, okay? That being the case, some of the elements of the Quran that you can employ when you're trying to uncloud the fitrah would have to do with the Quranic beauty. So even the oral experience, or let's say the auditory experience of the Quran can uncloud the fitrah. And I know that's not, like in the day and age we live in, you're like, wait a minute, but that's not a hard, straight rational argument. How will that convince someone that Islam is the truth? But again, Islam being the truth is already part and parcel of every single human being. In other words, that Allah exists, He's the only one worthy of worship. And again, like we said, certain morals. Okay? So all that needs now, perhaps, is the auditory sensation. And that's something that's downplayed a lot, right? Just because we've elevated rational arguments to a very high status. Okay. Sometimes the meaning of the Quran, and here we're not talking about how the Quran argues with the person, but just in terms of how it highlights, let's say, certain existential questions. So existential questions have to do with your existence. Why am I here? How did I get here? What happened when I died? Okay. So that's the section of Revelation. Experiences. When you experience natural beauty, that has an impact on a few things. One thing that it does, and we're not going to go into details about this here, because I've done a whole talk on this, whole lecture, I'm going to be publishing a paper, inshallah, is that natural beauty, it does two things. When you are exposed to natural beauty, let's say you're going to the Niagara Falls, okay, Canada side, not the United side, okay. Anyway, so you're exposed to Niagara Falls. What happens is that one of the effects is that your ego is actually decreased. It makes your ego go down. Okay, that's one effect. Second effect, it actually helps cognition. It increases cognition. Okay. Now, very quickly, how we know that is obviously from our own sources. We know, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Inna Allah jameel wa yuhibbul jamal." Indeed, Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. But that's not the entire hadith, because right after that, He mentions kibar. He says, "Kibr, batrul haq, wa ghamtun nas." So there's a link of some sort between beauty and ego. And of course, in that talk, what I do is I actually go through some studies that were done within social psychology about how we actually show that, yeah, when a person is exposed to the natural world, they have a feeling of smallness. They enter into a feeling of awe, right? And awe is a very difficult feeling to really describe, right? It's a word, but you only know it when you actually feel it, right? So how many people have seen the Kaaba, for instance? You've seen it? How did you feel? Yeah, of course, and you can't really describe it, right? So that feeling, when you're exposed to the natural world, that feeling of awe, that feeling of smallness, that feeling, sometimes you're in a type of fear, which is not the fear like, you're watching Halloween or something and you're scared, there's like a jump scare. That's not that type of fear, but a fear that's a bit different, right? It's very hard to articulate, but you understand when you've actually experienced it. Okay. So natural beauty, one of the functions is it decreases ego and it increases cognition as well. And there's, again, studies in social psychology that kind of mention this, aside from other things. Positive experiences. When you're meeting someone and just good character, that can have an impact on a person. That ties with human relationships. Reflection, introspection, we'll get into that in a little bit. And this last one's very interesting. That is spirituality. Many times you'll find that when a person comes to Islam, it's again not related to a rational argument. You might invite someone to join you in Salah, okay, and they'll pray. They're not Muslim yet, but just the impact of being in the state of Salah, that's enough to seal the deal. Or for instance, you might invite them to fast, come to the masjid during the month of Ramadan. Just the sheer experience of being in the masjid and then that overwhelming kind of environment of the Quran being recited and the masjid being jam-packed, that's very overwhelming. So spiritual acts can also uncloud the fitrah. And in fact, that's why we engage in spiritual acts, right? Because our fitrah gets clouded all the time anyway, right? Because of sins, because of experiences, because of environments, so on and so forth. The reason why we have these spiritual acts is to get our fitrah back to its kind of original state. And that's an ongoing process, right? Anyways, so that's basically the fitrah, how to uncloud the fitrah. Any questions about this? Because the course isn't really about the fitrah itself. We have a whole separate course that gets into details about the fitrah, and we have a separate course that gets into more details about, how to uncloud the fitrah. And it's called Awakening the Truth Within. It's actually a Dawah training course. But any questions about this before I move on? Yeah. So in a sense, every single person has a fitrah, but the fitrah will be different in certain cases. So for instance, a male fitrah and a female fitrah will be slightly, right? But every single person has a fitrah, right? So remember we were saying that even in terms of the effect, like can you replace the fitrah? You cannot. But there will be certain differences, right? There's certain differences in the nature of how, feminine nature versus male nature. And I really don't know how much to open this. It's not a big can of worms. But there's a dynamic interplay between our physical body and the fitrah itself. Okay, meaning that there's a certain reality anatomically as a woman, and there's a certain reality anatomically as a male, that defines basically you're a male or a female, but that's also related to the fitrah as well. There's a dynamic interplay there. But again, that will have to, that will be a separate course, inshallah. That's just on the fitrah. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Specifically about the fitrah, about what we spoke about yesterday, because it's really important. That was the foundational stuff. So if that's not clear, the rest of the stuff may not, you may be a bit shaky on it. Anything from yesterday or what we just spoke about? We're good? Okay. Let's get to the definition of atheism. Now, this is where we get into the topic in earnest. All right. So atheism, actually, before I do that, what do we mean by atheism? Yeah. Not believing in any God? Okay, good. Anybody else? So wait, say that again. You're So linguistically, it would be in the realm of a deity, in the realm of God, basically, right? So you can't be atheist against, let's say, spaghetti. It's that's not, it won't really work, right? Anybody else? What is atheism? Is it that simple? Just not believing in God? Yeah. Rejecting the existence of God. Okay, all right. Yeah. Believing that the world came about without a creator, or the universe came about without a creator. Okay. Disbelieving the supernatural in its entirety. Okay, very good. Anybody else? All right. So believe it or not, academically, there's no agreed upon definition of atheism within Western academia. So we're going to go, like I mentioned yesterday, with a working definition. All right. So atheism, it's basically someone who is not a theist, right? Someone that does not believe in a God or God. So, like I mentioned, academically, there's no consensus on a specific definition. All right. But because we need to continue on with the course, we're basically just going to say that it is to disbelieve in a God or gods. And this disbelief, to not believe in a God or gods, it has various classifications that we need to understand before we start speaking to an atheist. Because you have to understand, okay, well, what type of atheist? What kind of atheist are we speaking about, right? Or speaking to, rather. All right, let's look at the first one. So if we say that an atheist is someone who's not a theist, okay, this atheist is making what we call a knowledge claim. They're saying, as in terms of me knowing something, that there is no God. The claim itself, like I mentioned up there, it's a positive claim. Okay, when you make a positive claim, in that case, you have to produce some sort of evidence. So if you say there is no God, what's the evidence for that? But here's the issue. If you ever go to an atheist and tell them, okay, well, what's the evidence for there being no God? What do you think they'll say to you? What's the evidence of God? All right, so now you get into a battle of who has the burden of proof. In fact, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All stories. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It reminds me of something that, right? It reminds me of something that Sheikh Yusuf Estes said some time ago. He said, if you ever took an atheist and threw him out of a plane, he would have been like, oh, nothing. Like he would call on something, right? Okay, sure. Right. Okay. Yeah. He just started saying, oh, mashallah. Okay. So here's what I'm trying to highlight here, by the way. And it may be a kind of a finer philosophical point. There was a professor by the name of Anthony Flew. Anyone heard of him? Anyway, very popular. So he was an atheist philosopher. And one of the things that he did is he categorized atheists into two sections, into two camps. He said you have positive atheists and negative atheists. Okay. And what he means by this is that when you make a positive claim, what you're saying is that I am positive that there's no such thing as a God. In other words, I can substantiate that claim. A negative claim is to say, I'm not really sure, but the evidence that we have now is not enough for me to establish that there's a God. So it's a very nuanced position, but you understand that generally when you say atheism, you're making a positive claim. The problem with that is that there's no way for you to substantiate that positive claim. Proof, in other words. The best that an atheist can do when it comes to proof is resort to the problem of evil. And we have a whole section on that. Okay, that is the absolute best. Most atheists are what we call negative atheists. In other words, what they're saying is that the proof that you're giving me, or that quote unquote religion gives, I don't believe that. So in essence, they're not really atheists, they're just kind of extreme agnostics, which we'll get to in a second, okay? So that's what we call agnostic atheism, which is what most atheists are, because they never say, I make a positive claim and I can prove to you that God doesn't exist, okay? Because what would you need to do in order to prove that God doesn't exist? You'd have to say, okay, well, we've observed every single known realm of everyone, which is impossible, basically, right? So to make a positive claim, it's an impossible claim, right? Especially with the tools, if you are an atheist, that you have, which is just the empirical world, right? Just the world around you. To make a positive claim, you can never, and that's why any discussion you get into with an atheist, they will always say the burden of proof is upon you, okay? And we have a whole section about how you shift that discussion to say, no, in fact, the burden of proof is on you, but that's a separate section, inshallah, okay? Most atheists, you say, they fall under agnostic atheism. They have a negative claim to say, I just don't believe the proof, okay? That being the case, that holding such a position would imply that if a good enough argument were offered for God's existence, they would have to accept it. So if you're saying that there's just not enough proof, in other words, you're open to the fact that if there was proof, then you'd accept it, right? So I know it's a bit of a, it's a bit nuanced, but it's important for an atheist making a positive claim versus one who's not, right? And most of them are not, they're making negative claims. Okay, then you have what we call lifestyle atheism. Okay, this is very interesting. Now, this is if an atheist disbelieves based on mere choice in the absence of any rational investigation, how does that differ from any other belief? In other words, someone's atheist because that is what is in vogue. That is, like your environment, basically, if you're not atheist, you're kind of the outcast. So you know what? I'll be atheist just because it's cool, right? Because when you go and you go to some of these TED Talks and everyone there is atheist, so you know what? I'm just going to be atheist. You haven't really thought about it. You haven't really, there's no sort of rational component to it. Nothing. So that's what we call lifestyle atheists. I remember there's this lady, I think there was an atheist conference somewhere, and she kind of stood up and she says, I love atheism. Yay! Right? It was almost like she's at a concert or something, right? So you find that you have people that have not really thought about it, but just because it happens to be in vogue, it happens to be in style, that they're atheists, right? And so that's what we call lifestyle atheists. By the way, I've heard, I haven't confirmed this, but that you have the phenomena of atheism spreading in places like Pakistan. And interesting enough, my friends who have been there, they said that when they engage with some of the atheists, those people that claim to be atheists in Pakistan, they had no idea about any of the arguments. He goes, sometimes you'll be arguing with them, you have to teach them the argument, then refute the argument you just taught them, right? Because most of them are, you can say in a sense, lifestyle atheists. It's just that's the way to go. That's part of your, let's say, socioeconomic environment that you're in. So therefore, we'll be atheists because it's cool to be the atheist, right? So lifestyle atheism. Mesotheism. All right, I'm going to get up and walk around. Is that okay? All right. I actually don't prefer sitting most of the time. Mesotheism. This is an interesting one. So mesotheism has to do with a hatred for God. And this is a little bit different than pure, like atheism. Okay? What this is that it's not necessarily saying that God doesn't exist, but it's almost like looking at the suffering around the world and saying, how dare God do such a thing? Okay. So in a sense, it's a hatred for God, mesotheism. Anyone ever seen the play called the Book of Mormon? Okay, good. So there was some time I was visiting London, and my wife was with me, and she's like, "Oh, this play is I'm like, okay, that's good. I'm in the field of theology, and I should go watch this play. Don't watch it." Okay, so we went to the play, and it's about these two guys. They're Mormon missionaries, and they go to some village in Africa. Okay, and in this village in Africa, They're trying to now obviously make that way to them through Mormonism. Okay, but what they find is that this village in Africa, they have this sort of, collective dance and song that they do. And basically what that song and dance is basically, how do I put this? Where I must get here. So it's basically curse with God. Take that to the extreme, you know what I'm talking about, right? I don't know how to articulate it. And the song is basically like such and such to you, oh God. That point I was like, I can walk out. I should be here, right? I had no idea. Anyway, why was it that they had that song? Is because they were going through so much trouble, so much hardship. They had generals that had come into their village. They had, overtaken some of the women, kidnapped some of the men, killed them, and all this stuff. And so they started to develop a hatred for God. So they actually put that in song and dance, right? And that's what we talk about Mesotheism. Mesotheism, interestingly enough, it actually comes from in a sense, a good place. Strange to say. So that's why Associate Professor Bernard Weitzer, he says, and he did a lot of research in this, he says that Mesotheists struggle with the idea of a loving, compassionate God in a world of evil and suffering. The motivation for the hatred of God is to be generally motivated by admirable humanistic impulses. Meaning, because they have this idea, okay, that if you have a loving, nurturing, merciful God, and you have all this suffering, that's where the hatred stems from. Okay. So recognizing some of these categories becomes important, right? Are you talking to someone who's a Mesotheist? Are you talking to someone who's an atheist in the sense that made a positive case against atheism? Are you talking about an agnostic atheist? Or let's get that one. Or are you, and this is the second point related to the general movement of atheism, are you talking to a philosophical naturalist? Okay. This one is probably the most important one you need to take from this section. Okay, what do I mean by philosophical naturalism? So before you guys start reading the slides, when we talk about naturalism, the idea of naturalism is that any sort of information that we're going to acquire is going to be from the natural world. Okay? And this is, so in the realm of science, whatever field of science you're in, this is a base assumption, meaning that whatever explanation you're going to give for any sort of phenomena that you're observing has to be a natural explanation. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in the sense that if you're doing science, you can be a naturalist and be a Muslim and assume that within the realm of science, that's perfectly okay. The problem arises is when you take this idea that every explanation has to relate to the actual workings of the world and nature only, if you move that outside of science, now you moved it from a simple method to a philosophy. And there's a big logical leap here. Okay. Most atheists are what we call philosophical naturalists. They say that any sort of explanation you give has to be natural, it has to be according to the laws of nature, it has to be within the physical world. Okay. So tied with that is the idea of materialism. It has to be a material, natural explanation. Okay? So they're known as philosophical naturalists. So like atheism, philosophical naturalism denies the divine and supernatural. Philosophical naturalism is the view that, number one, there's no God. That's the baseline assumption. All phenomena can be explained via physical process. That is the assumption here. Okay? All right, there's no non-physical, rejects all supernatural claims. There's nothing outside of the universe. And even if there is something outside the universe, it doesn't have any effect of what's going on in the universe. Okay? Now here's the interesting thing. Not all atheists are philosophical naturalists. Because in order to do that, you have to deny certain things very directly. For instance, consciousness. If you say that every single thing can be chalked down to all phenomena are explained by physical processes, how do you explain consciousness? Right? That's a big quagmire, right? That's a big problem for someone that claims philosophical naturalism. There's a few other problems we'll get into in a second. But does everyone understand philosophical naturalism? Is that clear? Okay. So what is philosophical naturalism? You can't read the slide. Right, everything can be explained by natural physical processes. Okay? And so therefore there's no God, there's nothing outside of the universe. Even if there is something outside of the universe, it has no impact on the universe itself. Everything can be explained by physical processes. We're going to see why this is very problematic in a little bit here. Okay? All right. So most atheists are philosophical naturalists. There are some that don't. There are not philosophical naturalists because again, there's certain problems that arise when we adopt philosophical naturalism, but most of them are. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the Islamic definition of atheism. So generally, the term is ilhad. So ilhad literally it means to deviate. All right. It comes from the term lahad. So a lahad is a type of grave that is dug. Anyone know what kind of grave this is? Yes. Very good, mashallah. So yeah, it's kind of a, so you have two types of graves, right? Generally, one that's straight down and one that's like an L shape. Okay, so a lahad is like the one with the L shape. Basically, you take the body, you put it on the side, you have the bricks, have the person facing Qibla, and so on and so forth. So this kind of L shape or kind of straight, it's bit off. That's a lahad. Okay, so from there you get ilhad, which is that deviation from the straight kind of grave that you've done. Okay, that's where the term comes from in terms of how we define atheism in Arabic. So it comes from the term lahad. Anyway, so and that's that. Okay, we'll skip that for now. Skip all these because we'll cover this. All right, let's get into the implications of a world without God. Before we do that, any questions about definitions of atheism or categories of atheism? Everyone understand? Yeah. The philosophical naturalism? Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the sticky points, right? So, in other words, like things like causal links, right? That's a thing that you just take for granted. But then if you ask where causal links come from, that becomes a problem. That's one problem amongst many, that you have a problem of kind of determinism versus free will, and there's so many issues that arise. But the recourse is that look, we can only explain things via physical processes. And so that's what we're going to go with. That's what we observe, that's the thing that we know. Everything else are just fairy tales. It's a choice. We make that choice as that is how we understand the universe around. Yeah. Okay. Oh, repeat the questions. Okay, I'll do that moving forward, inshallah. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so right. Okay, so ilhad is a type of shirk. Okay, why is it a type of shirk? Because if you think about how we define shirk, we see that one way of understanding shirk is that we take the attributes of Allah and assign it to a human. Or you take a human being and give them the attributes of Allah, meaning that perfect sense. Okay? This is one of the ways is the shift in the names and attributes of Allah. Okay? When you say there's no God, there's no creator, you're assigning nothing the attribute of creation. You're saying Khalik, nothing. Right? That assignment is a type of shift. So whatever, if you want to get technical in this area, you say that obviously whatever punishment we have, the atheists would have, because they're doing a type of shift. That makes sense. So sorry, the question was, how does the Quran elucidate the category of what atheism for those that we have? Yes. Mesotheism, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So how do we deal with mesotheists? Very good question. That question, its answer is coming up. We have a whole section on the problem of evil. And how do you deal with the problem of evil philosophically, emotionally, psychologically, and so on. Right? So we want to, because there's a multifaceted way you approach someone that's has gone through certain sort of trauma, right? So a person lost their parents, let's say cancer, why would God do that to her? She was this person, yada yada yada. Okay, but that has a number of different components. The logical form most of the time doesn't work. Okay, and then there's the emotive form. How do you deal with that from a psycho-spiritual emotive way? We're going to get to that. There's a whole section covering problem people, but that's how you deal with these. Any other questions? Yes. Naturalism. Yes.
So, do you think people in academia, mainly people who have gone to a certain level of academia, they tend to shift over from a certain set of religion that is start thinking on those lines?
Of course. I mean, so do people shift, let's say in academia, they start from some position, they eventually end up in a state where they accept naturalism as a tool to understand the entire world, right? The entire existence. Of course. Remember, your environment has an impact. Right? That's bound to happen. The issue is that it's important for, at least if you're a Muslim and you're in academia, to be able to understand the difference between methodological naturalism and philosophical. As a method, it's okay to use, as long as you understand that it has a specific domain, a specific conceptual domain. That section we're going to get into when we talk about the philosophy of science. One thing that I really like, if I was to, alhamdulillah, I would be inviting some of the Islamic schools and their boards, is to teach the philosophy of science to young students. To not just take science and just say, okay, well, this is what we're going to teach. I think the curriculum is giving, there you go for it. But to understand what are the limitations of the scientific endeavor itself, right? We're going to get into that, but I really do believe that, when kids are at, let's say, middle school, high school, because they will never teach that to you, unless even in college, when you start taking courses, you have to be in the philosophy department before you start taking a class in the philosophy of science. But if you don't understand the philosophy of science, you'll go down there. Say, okay, you know what? Naturalism is how I view reality. Therefore, how do I know God exists? Right? How do I know the Islamic paradigm is true? And so on and so forth. And all of that has to do with that shifting of the assumption. Okay? Anyways, but we have a whole section on that. Get there when we get there, inshallah. Any other questions? And here we're just talking about categories. So if I'm not answering your question right now, it's because we have more information on that later. Anybody else? What's clear? Yeah.
All these definitions, these actual definitions, or they created boxes.
So,
the one perspective or the academic perspective.
So the definitions themselves, like I said, the Islamic definition we said was ilhad, right? And there's also writings on that, how we approach that. Classical scholars have written on it, which we employ. That's basically run for this course is writing. This categorization comes from academia. But again, I want to caution. Yesterday when I was speaking about the components of a worldview, that is a categorization. But whenever we talk about taxonomy, we talk about how we categorize things. You can always categorize things differently because we're working with. No, I shouldn't. Right. We're working with language. One of the issues with language is that how we classify things can differ, right? So classification is only there for to understand the concept, right? Is it something real per se? How do we classify it different? Instead of calling someone an agnostic atheist, you can say it's a negative atheist, right? The meaning is kind of the same. Right. So you could say rational versus irrational. That would be a way to classify it. But again, classifications, they're only to, they're a pedagogical tool at the end of the day, just used for teaching, right? So yeah, no problem. Okay. Let's move on, inshallah. We're going to move on to a more implications of life without God. Inshallah, we're going to break at 2:15 to allow you guys to pray. Some of you pray Asr, inshallah. So, go until then. Implications of life without God. Right? So, few things that we need to know before we enter into this section. We need to make sure we're clear about philosophical naturalism, which we just spoke about. So once again, what is philosophical naturalism? I know it seems like I'm just repeating it over and over again, but I want to make sure this is clear. I'm going to get to the next slide. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Then here, someone else decides to do their own thing. What is philosophical naturalism? Yes. Very good. Denial of the divine, everything explained by physical, natural processes, and nothing exists outside of the universe. And even if it doesn't have any sort of impact on our physical universe. Okay, so that's number one. When we talk about the implications of atheism, this is not an argument against atheism. Let me just make this clear. Okay, all we're saying in this section is that if it's true that everything has to be explained by physical processes, that has certain implications. If you take that to its logical end, it has implications. And what are some of those implications? Number one, no ultimate hope. You can't have ultimate hope. You can't have ultimate justice. You can't talk about value, like human value. Okay? You can't speak about purpose, and you can't speak about meaningful happiness, okay? Ultimate purpose. If you hold to philosophical naturalism, that everything is explained by physical processes, and these physical processes, if we boil it down further, these physical processes are blind, random, non-rational, and non-intentional. Okay, so I'll say it again. These physical processes, under this worldview, under philosophical naturalism, physical processes are blind, non-rational, non-intentional. There's no intention behind it. All right, blind, non-rational, non-intentional. That's it. Anyway, well, okay. Okay. Those are the implications, and then we'll look at some of the proposed solutions. All right. So again, this is not a rational argument for the existence of God. All we're saying now is that if this is what you believe, this has logical implications. Okay. All right. Let's start with number one, no ultimate hope. If you believe that everything can be explained by physical processes, right? Blind, non-rational, non-intentional, blind physical processes, how do you get to a point of hope? So what is hope? The feeling or expectation or desire for something to happen. Okay. How can you have hope if everything is just blind, non-rational, non-intentional physical processes? I always say, like, if an atheist goes to like a funeral, I mean, how would they console the person? Like we say, like, I'm really sorry that your relative has now moved on from one physical state to another physical state. They can't really offer you hope. I hope what? There is no hope, right? So under this, you find that there's no ultimate hope. You have to say ultimate hope. You can still have hope, right? It's not stopping you from having hope, but ultimate hope. So under this worldview, right? Everything, any phenomena are explained by physical processes, and these processes are blind, non-rational, non-intentional physical processes. How do you explain hope? How do you get to hope? And hope is a human reality, right? Like as human beings, you need hope. Okay, so hope goes out the door. All right. So someone may say, so denying the hereafter renders hope meaningless. You could have a life of suffering. Can you hope for a better end after your death? No. Okay. What if someone comes and says, yeah, but I've lived my life to the maximum. I've enjoyed myself wonderfully. Right? So why do I need hope? But you would hope that it continues. So you can't even have that. Right? And so on. So under atheism, you have a real big problem of there being no ultimate hope. In our tradition, do we have hope? Of course, it's infused with hope over and over and over again, right? One of the stations of the heart is the hope in the mercy of Allah, right? It's an elevated spiritual state. Over and over again, the Quran mentions this, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, like, certainly no one despairs of Allah's mercy except people who disbelieve. You know why I think this ayah is interesting? Is because one of the qualities of those who disbelieve is not having despair, right? In fact, some ulama mentioned that despair can be blameworthy. As a Muslim, you should never despair, right? Why? Because your belief in Allah allows you to have hope. It is a quality of the kuffar, right? To despair in the mercy of Allah, to not have hope. Okay, which is, absolutely true when it comes to someone who's an atheist and then adopts philosophical naturalism. Okay, number two, what is the second implication? No ultimate justice. So under atheism, ultimate justice is unachievable. Okay, and here I'm saying ultimate justice. Can we achieve justice in this world? Like in this dunya, justice is achievable? To some degree. Okay. How many people say like, yes, you can get to justice? Yeah? Okay. How many people say you kind of sort of you put it with him, right? To some degree? All right. So I tell my kids this all the time. Okay. They'll say something, two siblings are fighting, and so parents know this very well. This person throat, you walk into this situation, you have no idea what's going on. He hit me first. No, but she hit me first. And you're just like, what is going on? And you stop, okay, nobody hit nobody, right? No, he hit me first, and this and that. And it's like, you're being unfair. You know my response is? Ultimate justice is only from hereafter. You live in a tyrannical household, man. That's just how it is, right? Allah, you can't really do more than that. I'll do the best I can, but only Allah knows the situation, right? And they hate that answer. Anyway. Okay, so coming back to no ultimate justice. If we are looking for ultimate justice, which is a general human kind of need, right? A human kind of, it's a human desire. We want justice under a worldview that says everything can be explained by way of physical processes that are blind, non-rational, random, and non-intentional. You can never achieve ultimate justice. Justice is an unattainable goal, right? Now, someone may say, no, but you might be able to achieve it, right? Like we have courts, we have systems of justice, but are those systems really just? Well, let me put it this way. What contention could someone have for this? What do you think someone could say? Like, no, you can actually achieve justice. How would they argue that? What do you think? And by the way, I want just let me mention something here real quick. Just because I'm saying these things doesn't mean you have to accept it. You should actually have some pushback, right? Yeah. Okay. Natural physical justice. Okay. Do I need to go there or just do that alone? Okay, all right. Anyone else? Because look, you will get pushback. People are like, oh, it's ultimate justice. They're going to say something. What do you think they'll say? Yeah.
To answer the question, you really have to answer what is ultimate justice. What is it? Because you would see that there is justice in terms of certain environments. You say, there is a court of law, and people are supposed to render justice.
Sure.
And to resolve issues. And there is some amount of justice, but it is limited to that particular environment.
Okay.
Now, when you say ultimate justice, that is the sum of everything around. Like, there are you considering the period of this life and then the hereafter? Because, you could say that even though it cannot be just for that one is a rich man, another person,
yeah,
and just God, why would you have two people, different? Why would he grant so much?
Right.
Why would he take away somebody? But then, you really regard that they may have less plans, they may have.
Of course.
So it really gives we have to define.
Right.
Being,
sure.
if we have to say whether it exists or not.
Okay. So we talk about ultimate justice. It means justice that is satisfactory. Let's put it that way. All right. So I'll give you a pushback that I had on. Okay. I said, look, man, think about Hitler, okay? Where's the ultimate justice there? You kill like 6 million Jews, brutally, like just in a horrible way. How is it that, where's the justice there? He just died once, right? Killed 6 million people. So you know what the response was? The response was, the thing is that he went through such a severe state of depression that all those 6 million people weighed down on his conscience so bad that torture in and of itself laid the scales flat. And they made it even. All right, how are you responding? What do you think? How should I respond to that? Yeah. 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 Well, I mean, we know that he had like psychological problems, very well documented in his diaries, and ultimately at the end, I mean, he did that very well. Get very clear about that. Yeah, I mean, it was just right. 6 million people died. He got what goes around. Yeah. So he came back around. Yeah. That's a separate argument. We're saying that we understand the concept of justice before we get to the meta discussion. What is justice? Before we get there, even our sense of justice, how is that served? What I'm saying. Under a worldview that says everything happens by way of processes, it's blind, random, non-rational, non-intentional. Well, then how do they hold justice? So the retort to that was, well, Hitler got rid of 6 million people. Okay. Scales are balanced. Oh. Actually, there's actually a really easy answer. Yeah.
They're saying that.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, they may argue like, well, yeah, we're graduates, we're in prison, we're credit too, so you get the best of both worlds. Look, the simple thing is, yes, it's justice related to, Hitler, but what about justice to the lady who's now being thrown into the fire pit? Right? Where's justice for her? Where's her ultimate justice? Right? So it still doesn't solve the issue here. Okay, so under this worldview, you can never come to ultimate justice. Right? There's an additional kind of interesting aspect of that, and that is that when you basically say that everything happens by way of physical processes, all phenomena are explained like this, you actually are basically, saying that morals in and of themselves don't really have value. Okay? And actually, we'll get to that section again in morality, so let me not do that just yet. Okay. Implication number 3, no ultimate value for human life. Okay, now let's paint a scenario for you. Okay. I want you to imagine now that I'm here, I'm busy in your community, and you took this course, you thought, and one of you thought, you know what, this course stopped. It's like one of the worst courses, it wasted my time, and this guy came from out of town, I don't know who he thinks he is. Dresses funny, and all the other things, all this sort of stuff happens, and you start thinking about it more and more, and get really, really upset. Like, what, he's finishing his last day. I need to just beat this guy up, right? I'm gonna take a sledgehammer and just knock him in. Okay. Now, the rest of you you see this man, he's really upset. And let's pretend now that there's this large 6-foot chocolate bunny right here. Okay. And this man comes in, he's like, look, I gotta knock something. Because that guy came here and wasted my entire day. So either I'm gonna knock him, or you know what, I'll at least knock that chocolate bunny. What do you recommend that he does? That he takes that sledgehammer and goes bite at me, pop, or does he just take that chocolate bunny? Which one should he get? Okay, I guess this will tell me how good the class is, right? So I get it, I lost. How are you going to say chocolate bunny? All right, what are you going to actually say to me? All right, here's the question. Why would you say the chocolate bunny? Yeah. Right, you're getting too deep in the scenario. Keep it very superficial. You could hit something, right? You don't have time to sit there and be like, look, man, let's discuss it. Yeah, maybe, think about the word, blah, blah, yeah, okay, yeah, but you don't have time. You're rushing through those doors. It's like, hit something. So, yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. You are assigning a certain value to me, and you're assigning a certain value to the chocolate bunny, right? In other words, human life has more value than this chocolate bunny. Under a worldview that says every phenomenon can be explained by way of physical processes that are blind, rational, non-intentional, and so on and so forth that are random, how do you give value over the chocolate bunny? Under that worldview, how do you establish value? Give it a shot, man. Like I said, have some pushback. Sorry? Okay, so under this physical processes that are blind, random, non-rational, purposeless, what is my purpose? I mean, the bunny's tangible. I what? Okay, you said okay. Oh, you can't. Okay. I want some pushback. I want to don't just take my word for it. Yeah.
Each thing in this world, it has a certain value, like $100 is not. Each of it is assigned an intrinsic value.
Okay.
So in that, you have a higher value than you have.
Okay. What gives it value? If everything is just random, blind, non-rational, non-intentional, where does value come from? How are you going to give it value? How are you going to justify giving it value? Where does value come from? Yeah, I'm living and breathing. So what? The processes are random, blind, non-rational, non-intentional. I'm a bunch of carbon particles, and this thing is a bunch of carbon particles too. I pay taxes. Good one. Why is it valuable? So what? Yeah, I pay taxes. All right. Yeah. So what? In fact, can you say your consciousness? If everything is explained by way of physical processes, is consciousness a physical thing? You got a bigger can of right there. Like how are you going to solve that issue? But even if we agree that consciousness, why is consciousness valuable? Why is decision making valuable? Yeah.
As we move to the answer, so values and ethics, thinking on for that.
Okay. All right. Yes, I did. Putting the legal implications aside, right? What gives me more value than fun? That's the simple question.
Maybe
we could, okay. But then you got another issue. Yeah. Okay, fair enough, that's fine. But I'm saying, from a philosophical justification point of view, how do you give me more value? How do you give humans more value than anything else? Right? The rules, social ontology, just came together and read. It's like this is more valuable than this. If the whole world came together and said, like, okay, so the chocolate bunny is more valuable than me, do I become less valuable? In your eyes personally? Oh, okay. Anybody else? Yes. Okay, that's fair enough. But why is that valuable in and of itself?
They don't like chocolate.
Because they like chocolate. They don't like chocolate. You don't like chocolate. So it's tasty. Okay. The reality is that under a worldview that only says that these processes, you cannot establish boundaries. There's nothing that is outside of limited mind and human emotion that can give it value. Okay? So when you have a discussion, where this discussion becomes interesting, we talk about things like human rights. You know, I remember one of my teachers, he says, this is when the the Declaration of Human Rights was initially put together, and he was having a conversation with someone. They said, there's certain Muslim countries that have not signed on to the declaration. How dare they don't sign on? They're saying like a woman can't marry whoever she wants. Right? She has to marry, someone that's Muslim. That's a fundamental human right. So we asked that person, we said, who made these rights rights? Like, why are they rights in the first place? Right? But you can ask a more deeper question, why do you have human rights? How did you get human valuation in the first place? Who says humans are more valuable? Right? And in fact, certain people would agree with that, right? You ask certain vegans. But anyway, so can blind, non-conscious reality make sense of a min-independent nature of the universe, of universe value or human rights? Okay. If that's the case, coming back to the Islamic paradigm, do we have a basis for giving humans value? Of course. Well, indeed, we have honored the children of Adam. There is, in a sense, well, not in a sense, but there is something that transcends limited mind and human emotion and the physical universe that basically says it can assign value, right? That's outside of us. And so therefore, there's a justification to why you can have a hierarchy of rights, human rights, animal rights, plant rights. That whole hierarchy, it comes from that which transcends limited mind and emotion, right? So when we talk about rights, it's a more robust, thorough discussion, right? As opposed to someone that says everything happens by way of random, blind, non-rational, non-intentional processing. Make sense? So under atheism, the third implication is that there's no ultimate value for human life. You have to let that go. Again, it's a logical implication. I'm not saying that atheists don't value human life. Don't take this that version. Right? I'm not saying that if you're an atheist, you just go around. Nothing matters. I mean, it's certainly atheists think that, but what we're saying is that's the logical implication of that. Is what we're saying. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. So remember, we have Mesotheism and we have philosophical naturalism. They could actually be both, but here we're talking about philosophical naturalism, right? If you come from Mesotheism, in fact, some Mesotheists may not believe in God, but the hatred of God is really what the powerful right? They could be just on the border, rejecting God altogether, right? Again, Mesotheism is a hatred of God, but obviously God doesn't exist when you hate it. So again, it's just for that classification we're talking about. But you could have some Mesotheists that are philosophical, that do not want. So if there was a God, we would hate it. That's basically what it would be. But then you have to replace it with something, right? How does the phenomenon even happen? Okay. All right. No meaningful happiness. All right. Now I want to talk about meaningful happiness here, not just happiness. I want you to do the thought experiment. I heard this before. So if you have, just bear with me. All right. Everyone is here. Everyone's on their phones. No, I'm kidding. Everyone's here. Hopefully you're paying attention to what I'm saying. All right. And as you're listening to me speak, all of a sudden you black out. It's just a thought experiment. All right, you speak, boom, you black out. And when you wake up, you find yourself you're on a plane. And on this plane, you are sitting in a first class seat. Anyone flown first class? Few people? Okay. They bump you up to first class on the way here. Without me, I had no idea. And I was like, wow, this is why. People love first class, right? It's like feeding your ego up. I remember Imam Fahad, he said that once they bumped up to first class, he goes, it's really bad for the soul. Because someone from the back might want to use your bathroom, like, why are you using our bathroom, right? Like, so, anyway, so you're on this plane, right? You're sitting in class, you black out, you wake up, you're on a plane. Okay? You're sitting in this first class seat, very comfortable. All right, now in this first class seat that you're in, the temperature is absolutely perfect. Okay, maybe this doesn't apply here, but in Houston, one of the main areas of contention within my household is where we set the thermostat. Okay, some people like it cold, some people like it so all the sibling rivalries and fights and stuff usually around the thermostat, right? 72, 74, cold, hot. But in this plane, in your first class seat, the temperature is just the way you like it. And when you look outside, there's a beautiful like orange hue. You know what I'm talking about? Like when the sun is just about to set, it's very pleasing to the eyes. Okay. And after a few minutes, as you're marveling at the view outside, you're enjoying the comfortable seat, temperature is just right, you smell something. So, favorite food. Favorite food. Sushi? Oh, man. Okay, good. So after a little while, the stewardess or steward brings out a tray of sushi, right? And you can replace whatever your favorite food is, fill in the blanks. Okay? For me, it's steak. I'm coming from Texas, so that might be a bit obvious. Anyway, so you smell the sushi or whatever else you guys like. Fill in the blanks, fill in the blanks. And you put the sushi in your mouth. It is the best sushi or steak or whatever you've ever had. Okay. So amazing food. You're very comfortable. You know, the plane, I mean, it's very comfortable. The temperature is perfect. The scene outside is beautiful. Would you be happy? How many would be happy? Good. Would you have meaningful happiness? What I mean is, you are sitting in the masjid and all of a sudden you blacked out and now you're on the plane. You do not have some sort of questions that might be like, I don't know, how did I get here? Why am I here? And maybe a very important question, where is the plane going? Right? Maybe another question, who's the pilot? Okay. So many questions. The thing is, if you think about life, life is like you being on a metaphorical plane. Because when you come to your consciousness, you're on a certain journey that you're going forward in. Okay? You come to a certain state, and yes, maybe you're enjoying all of the delights of life, but those questions don't go away. How did I get here? Where am I going? What happens when we come to the end of our journey? And why am I here? What's the view? Why am I here? All of those questions. If you take a world view that says we come from processes that are blind, non-rational, non-intentional, and random, it means there's no ultimate happiness. Ultimate happiness, right? So maybe you can be engaged with the delights around you, but ultimate happiness is something that you can't come to a conclusion. Okay. All right. So we're gonna stop on this one because I know you guys need to break for Salah, inshallah. And we'll come back and we'll finish this section and then move forward, inshallah. All right. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So we are starting. So if you can bring this up and give us a little bit quiet. If you don't mind. Okay. Let's move on to our next implication. Actually, I don't know why the slides are like that, but it's actually the fifth one, not the fourth one. All right. So we were talking about what is the logical implication of a worldview that's based upon philosophical naturalism. Remember, philosophical naturalism, that everything, all phenomena in this thing are processes, and these processes are blind, random, non-rational, and non-intentional. Okay. Now I'm saying that over and over again. Just think about that for a second. Processes are blind, and they're non-intentional, and they're non-rational. Rationality does not perceive the process, nor does intentionality. They're just random happenings. Okay. If that's a worldview, then our last implication here is that you cannot then assign any sort of ultimate purpose. Okay. In other words, we're talking about the components of a worldview. Under teleology, that box is empty. There's no ultimate purpose. Okay, so remember yesterday I was saying that even when it comes to history going in a certain direction, you couldn't assign a teleos or a purpose to that. And that's true for the human being, that's true for the universe, that's true for anything. What I find really interesting about the discussion is that there is a professor on campus, and actually I had a debate with him now. He's a professor of philosophy, and but he's a Catholic, which is really interesting. He's a very big fan of that. And so one of the areas that he writes on, because he writes a lot of articles and publications on how to deal with atheists. Now, so one of the areas he talks about is that if you take this to its logical conclusion, and you say that there is no seal, there's no purpose, many of the things that you are practicing in the world itself become problematic. For instance, if you say to a doctor that, okay, the organs and things like that that are in your body have no purpose, there is no way for medical science to move forward, right? Because nothing within your physical physiology has any sort of purpose. So if you claim that, take it to a logical conclusion, medical science itself doesn't move forward at all, right? But here we're talking ultimate purpose. Okay, this is obviously there's more of a emotive understanding here. So under this, if you take it to its logical conclusion, a person doesn't have purpose. There's no ultimate purpose. The response you might get to that is that, look, I make my own purpose. This is generally the response. How do you respond? So look, man, I make my own purpose. Okay. Right. Futile endeavor, right? And the second thing is, we're saying there's no ultimate purpose. And even if, let's say, you have a temporary purpose, but then that purpose becomes meaningless. Like someone once said that, imagine that someone puts you in a room for 5 minutes, you do all the toys you want, but you know you have to leave the room. So whatever you accomplish in that 5 minutes, it's kind of purposeless, right? Because you have to leave the room eventually. So we're the ultimate purpose. It doesn't tell you anything about ultimate purpose. Do human beings need ultimate purpose? Right? From a psycho-spiritual kind of emotive standpoint. Of course, human beings need a purpose. In fact, one of the main reasons why people come to Islam is because the purpose is so crystal clear and unequivocal, right? Whereas any other worldview just doesn't have that clarity in terms of why we exist, what is the life, right? Christianity doesn't have that. It's very, like when you start to dig in, you say, okay, what is the purpose of life in a Christian worldview? It's not something that's necessarily spoken about. Even if it is, they may say, oh, our purpose is worship. But it becomes a bit problematic, right? Because what do you mean by worship? What is the value of worship? So speaking about value, since I've opened the door of this, conversation, the problem arises is that when you speak about Christianity, you say, okay, well, we should make moral decisions on things, okay? And that's part of our worship. Islamic standpoint, when you make a moral choice, it has implications. It's a part of your worship, like you choose to do good, you choose to give sadaqah, you choose to do, that if you're in a certain situation, you can steal money, you don't. All those choices have moral implications. Under a Christian worldview, any moral choice lacks value. Why? Those of you who have deep understanding of Christian theology. Why does it not have value? Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Any answer you can get from us.
Sure.
Being a Muslim.
Sure.
Now,
Yep.
are you looking for that? Or are you looking for something way out there?
So I'm just asking the philosophical response. That's all I want, right? So as a Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian theology, whatever your knowledge of Christian theology is, how deep it is, why am I saying that under Christian theology, you have a difficult time assigning, value to morals? Why? Yeah. Sure. Sure.
Everything was the same.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Catholics there, they believe in what they were doing. And
Yep.
they believe in what.
Sure.
And this question never.
Sure.
So.
Well, it doesn't. Yeah.
You we. That question.
Well, yeah, that's any certain. So remember, everyone has a worldview. So no matter what, you cannot transcend bias. I'm not saying like, okay, you have to transcend bias and totally affect your answer. All I'm saying is that there's a reason and a certain, let's say, ethical problem with moral deeds within Christian theology. So I'll just let you know what it is, so we can move on. The ethical issue is that if Jesus died for your sins and you are guaranteed paradise, how do you value moral? Why make moral choices? Now, I'm not saying that they don't have solutions to this. There's many philosophical gymnastics that go through to answer that problem, right? But nevertheless, it's still an issue. All right. So, in other words, if whatever you do, Jesus has already died for your sins, then what gives anything moral value? Does anyone understand what I'm talking about here? Right? Does that make sense? Right? So yeah, maybe you say it's a biased view because I wasn't brought up in Christianity or whatever, but it's still something that you have to defend. That's all I'm saying.
But basically,
were you here yesterday? You were. Okay. Go back to yesterday. Because we spoke about why stop not. So you're comparing, and this is the main issue. This is why we said that if you categorize Islam as religion, put it in quarantine into a box where you're not getting a fair comparison. Yesterday we said that Islam is a faux pas, it's a mistake to categorize that. We said to categorize as a worldview is more appropriate. And so when you do that, then you can say, yes, how I lens by which I look at reality, it has certain components within it. So I'm gonna refer you to history, inshallah. Okay, someone else has their hand up? Yeah.
Okay, that is correct.
Correct, meaning?
Correct. What you said, that is a belief. Do what you want to during the week, Sunday, holidays, they were so, and then they have no whether because they were they were extinct, or the other people who were the chosen people too.
Right. Yes. So, anyways, that one I'm intending, I was not intending. So bring us back to atheism, inshallah. So no ultimate purpose. Okay. Now, there's people that have made up responses to like no ultimate purpose, and there's some of them up there within academia. So let's make up meaning and be responsible. Let's just accept it and face it. That's a postmodernist response. There is no meaning. Let's just find ways of ignoring the problem. Nihilism, nihilism. By the way, what is nihilism? You want to know? People. What's nihilism? It's all meaningless. Nothing is meaning, right? So if you're a nihilist, I don't know pronounce it. Nothing has any meaning. It's all meaningless. So suicide is a really great option, by the way, right? But if it's all just meaningless, but it goes back to, well, hold on a second. If we're all just material matter that's by way of physical processing, we don't have any value anymore. It's all just meaningless. It's all just doesn't matter, right? Okay, so if it's all matter, it doesn't matter. As the saying goes. Let's focus on the meaning of life as opposed to the meaning of life, meaning in life versus meaning of life. That's what some of the New Age talk about. Like, why are you worried about the meaning of life? You're talking about meaning in life. Like, what are you doing now, right? So you get this kind of hyper productivity stance sometimes. And then let's live in accordance with our biological drives. Pleasure is key. The meaning of life is to enjoy life. All right, that's just straight hedonism. Potential responses, but again, this is not an argument to prove the existence of God. It's just something that you want to say natural, logical conclusion if you take that worldview to its tail end. All right. Okay. Okay. I'm going to skip that for now. So that being the case, Islam obviously has in all those domains gives us very clear responses, right? And so ultimate justice, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is the only one that can give ultimate justice. Right? Allah knows you better than you know yourself. So even when you try to be just with people, you have no idea about the realities of their intentions, about their internal workings, only Allah knows that. So the one that has absolute knowledge, or let's say is maximally perfect in the knowledge, is the one that can be maximally just. Right? All names have to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So ultimate justice, ultimate hope, we spoke about that in that section. Ultimate value, we said that value has to come from that which transcends the human being. It has to come from something other than the being. Otherwise, you can't assign value at all. Purpose of life and purpose in life, and of course, meaning and eternal happiness. So all of those things are very clear. And of course, the core theme that all of these kind of issues, or you can say contentions, revolve around is the very purpose of why we created. Not create you, except I didn't create the jinn and the except for my worship. Okay, let's move on, inshallah. All right, we're gonna have a whole section on this, but just as maybe as a teaser, when people are not able to deal with things like no ultimate justice, no ultimate purpose, no ultimate meaning, and so on, what happens is they're in a certain problematic, emotive, psycho, and we would say spiritual state. And Islam is the only thing that actually gives you the way out of that. I remember when my father-in-law passed away, rahimahullah, he was, subhanAllah, he was, or his masjid, he was the main, not the main, the muazzin of the masjid. So he'd be there every salah, whenever it was, and he passed away on a Friday. He was getting ready for the salah, and he'd come out of the shower, he'd put on his clothes, on his perfume, and then that's when he passed away. And I kid you not, his janazah, it was like Eid Salah in the masjid. Like there was, for that masjid that's there, it's called Sinai Masjid. Next to it is the Hindu temple, and across the street from it is a church. And those parking lots, they have to, talk to them when it comes time for Eid. Okay, can we borrow them because we have so much parking? For his janazah, we actually had to talk to them. That's how people showed up. Okay. And I remember speaking to my wife, and she told me something that really hit me really hard. She said, we brought up that, blah, like that. Okay. If I didn't have Islam, I don't think I could make it. I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't make it. Whatever that signifies. But meaning it really hit me hard. When you really think about what is the value of Islam, it's not just limited to some sort of, like, let's say, rational certainty about Islam, but it transcends that. Because these are very real human problems, right? So yes, this is not an argument that this is a God or some syllogism, but nevertheless, it still has a lot of significance for most of humanity. And if anything, it should give you a motivation to share Islam with those that are out there who are on this metaphorical plane and have no idea why they're here, where the plane is going, where they came from in the first place. What does it say about us if we don't share the message? Right? There's something to think about, inshallah. Anyway, so moving on. Any questions about this section?